Walk out to your backyard garden in the middle of July. The afternoon sun is beating down on your neck. The air is thick with summer humidity, and your tomato plant is towering over you. It is lush, wide, and a brilliant, aggressive green. From a distance, it looks like a masterpiece of agriculture. It looks exactly like the pictures on the front of the fertilizer boxes. But then you step closer. You part those thick, strong, smelling leaves, looking deep into the center of the plant for the reward you have been working toward since April. And what do you find? You find a jungle of empty green branches. Maybe if you look closely enough, you find 2 or 3 small, hard, pale green tomatoes hiding near the bottom, refusing to turn red. Or, worst of all, you find a massive, heavy, beautiful red fruit. But when you turn it over in your palm, the entire bottom half is black, sunken, leathery, and rotting away. You stand there sweating, doing the math in your head. You spent $50 on premium potting soil in brightly colored plastic bags. You spent $20 on a box of pink synthetic fertilizer that promised a miracle harvest. You spent $15 on flimsy metal wire cages that bent and collapsed under their own weight after the first heavy summer thunderstorm. You watered it when the internet told you to. You fed it when the garden center employee told you to. You did exactly what the colorful tags instructed, and your reward is a barren, overgrown bush and a rotting fruit. You probably walk back into your air-conditioned house, thinking that you just do not have a green thumb. You think gardening is a mysterious, magical gift that some people are born with, and you simply are not. I want you to drop that thought right now. The problem is not your hands. The problem is not your soil. The problem is that you have been taught to serve a plant instead of learning how to master it. You have been trained by an industry to treat a wild thing like a delicate, spoiled pet, and you have been sold a dozen expensive products to help you coddle it. My name is Daniel Yoder. I am Amish. I live and farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, on the same deep topsoil my grandfather worked and his father before him. We do not use chemical fertilizers. We do not buy metal cages. We do not have irrigation systems controlled by a smartphone. And yet, every August, our cellars and summer kitchens are overflowing with hundreds of pounds of the sweetest, deepest red, most flawless tomatoes you will ever slice with a knife. My wife, Miriam, puts up over 100 quarts of crushed tomatoes, whole tomatoes, and sauce every September. We do not do this for a hobby. We do this to feed our children. Through the long gray winter, a failed crop is not an inconvenience for us. It is an empty pantry shelf, so we do not leave this to chance, and we do not leave it to the chemical companies. Today I am going to tell you exactly how we do it. I am going to give you the comprehensive, unvarnished truth about mastering this plant. I am going to debunk the lies that the internet and the hardware stores have been telling you. I am going to show you how to support 50 plants for the price of a sandwich. And if you stay with me to the end, I am going to share a secret that my grandmother taught me. A trick that costs exactly 17 cents, uses a common pill you already have in your medicine cabinet, and biologically tricks the tomato plant into fighting off disease and producing sweeter fruit. By the end of this, you will know more about the true nature of a tomato than the man who sold you the seeds, and you will never look at a garden center the same way again. Let us start with the truth about what a tomato plant actually is. This is the foundation of everything. If you do not understand this, no amount of fertilizer will save you. The people who sell you gardening supplies, the English builders, the modern agricultural corporations, they want you to believe a tomato is an upright bush. They sell you a 3-foot metal wire cage and tell you to put the plant inside it, like putting a bird in a cage. expecting it to stand up straight, behave itself, and neatly hand you a basket of fruit. But a tomato is not a bush. A tomato is a survivor in its wild, natural state. Originating in the rugged mountains of South America, a tomato is a sprawling, aggressive, creeping vine. Its singular goal in life is to survive, spread its leaves to capture the sun, and touch the ground. Wherever it can, it wants to crawl across the dirt. Put down roots, wherever its stem touches the damp earth, and create a massive, tangled, impenetrable mat of foliage. It does not care about producing a giant, juicy, 2-pound beefsteak tomato for your dinner table. Nature does not care about your sandwiches. The plant only wants to produce enough tiny seeds to ensure the next generation survives, and it wants to spend the rest of its energy growing leaves to dominate the space around it, choking out the weeds and the competition. If you leave a tomato to its own nature, it will give you exactly what you saw in your yard in July, a mountain of green leaves and very little fruit. To get fruit, you have to fight the plant's nature. You have to force it to do what you want, not what it wants. Gardening is not about letting nature run wild. It is about guiding nature with a firm, knowing, and sometimes heavy hand. You must become the master of the garden, not its servant. Rule number 1. The deception of the roots. The first step in taking control happens the very day you put the plant in the dirt, and this is where I need to correct a great deal of foolishness that is passed around as wisdom on the internet. When you bring a little tomato seedling home from the nursery, or when you pull it out of your own seed-starting trays, it is usually 6 to 8 inches tall. It looks fragile. The first thing you must do goes against every nurturing instinct you have. You must bury it alive. You take your pruning shears, and you snip off all the bottom branches, leaving only the very top cluster of leaves. Then you dig a deep hole, or better yet, a long, shallow trench, and you bury 2/3 of that plant completely underground. If the plant is a foot tall, 8 inches of it goes beneath the soil. Now, if you have watched gardening videos online, you have probably been told to plant your tomatoes deep. But the reason they give you is almost always a lie. I have heard so-called experts look right at a camera and tell you that the tiny, fuzzy white hairs growing all up and down a tomato stem will turn into roots. When they touch the dirt, they do not. That is a fairy tale, passed around by people who repeat what they hear, without ever observing the world they live in. Take a magnifying glass and look at those tiny hairs. They are called glandular trichomes. The plant produces them as a defense mechanism, not as a root system. Those hairs secrete the oils and compounds that give the tomato plant its sharp, distinct, bitter, green smell. That smell is meant to repel chewing insects. Furthermore, the hairs make it physically difficult for tiny pests to walk on the stem. If you rub your fingers along the stem, your fingers will turn yellow and smell like the garden. That is the trichomes doing their job. They have absolutely nothing to do with growing roots. So why do we bury the stem? Because underneath those protective hairs, hidden deep in the green flesh of the stem itself, are tiny invisible points called adventitious root primordia. They are little dormant root nodes, waiting for the right conditions. When those specific nodes are plunged into the cool, damp, absolute darkness of the soil, they wake up. The plant realizes it is underground. The nodes burst open, and they send thick, strong, lateral roots deep into the earth. When you bury the stem deep, you are building an anchor. Think about the architecture of the plant. A tomato plant with a normal, shallow root system, sitting in the top 4 inches of soil, will panic the moment the July sun dries out the topsoil. It will wilt in the afternoon heat. It will drop its yellow blossoms out of stress, and it will fail. But a tomato plant, with a root system that reaches 1.5 feet down into the cool, dark, consistent subsoil. Does not care how hot the afternoon gets. It has tapped into the deep reserves. It is steady. It is safe. It can withstand a week of drought because its roots are pulling moisture from deep below the evaporative line. That is rule number 1. Deceive the roots to build an unshakable foundation. Rule number 2. The necessary cruelty of the pruning shear. Once your plant is in the ground, anchored deep, and starts to grow, it will immediately try to revert to its wild nature. As the main stem grows upward, and the large compound shade leaves branch, out to the sides you will notice something happening in the corners of the plant. The little V-shaped crotches where the leaf meets. The main stem. A new little green shoot will start to grow there. We call them suckers. And that is exactly what they are. They are parasites. If you leave a sucker alone, it will grow into a completely new main stem. It will grow its own leaves, its own branches, its own flowers, and eventually its own suckers. Within a month, your single tomato plant will become 10 tomato plants, all tangled together, fighting for the same water, the same sunlight, and the same nutrients in the soil. The plant will expend all its energy building the physical woody structure of this massive tangled jungle. It will have almost zero energy left to produce blossoms, and the fruit it does manage to produce will be small, late, and shaded from the sun. You must be ruthless. My father taught me to walk the rows every evening after supper. You walk the rows and you pinch those suckers out. With your thumb and forefinger, you snap them off when they are small, no bigger than an inch or 2. Do not feel sorry for the plant. You are saving it from itself. By removing the suckers, you are taking all the energy the plant was about to waste on building a sprawling bush, and you are redirecting it straight upward, and eventually straight into the fruit. You want to force the plant to maintain one single thick main stem. When you prune a tomato to a single stem, those little wire cages from the hardware store become entirely useless. A healthy, single-stem, indeterminate tomato plant will grow 8, 10, sometimes 12 feet tall in a good season. A 3-foot cage is a joke to a plant like that. Instead, we use twine. Build a simple wooden frame over your garden bed. Sink 2 sturdy posts at either end of the row and run a strong crossbar across the top about 7 or 8 feet in the air. It looks like a heavy-duty clothesline. Tie a piece of heavy, natural twine to the top bar. Drop it down and tie it loosely, very loosely, using a bowline knot so it does not choke the stem to the very base of the tomato plant. As the plant grows taller each week, you do not need to tie it again. You simply take the top of the growing stem and gently twist it around the string. The string holds the plant up perfectly. This system costs pennies. It holds the plant secure against heavy winds. It allows maximum airflow. And when the season is over, you take your knife, cut the string at the top and the bottom, and throw the whole dead plant, string and all, directly into the compost pile. There are no rusted metal rings to untangle, scrub, and store. In the barn, all winter. Now I must pause here and be completely honest with you about the pruning, because a man who gives advice without considering the geography of where you live is a fool. If you live in the Northeast, the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest, or anywhere in Europe where the summers are damp, humid, the sun is reasonable, you must prune aggressively. You must strip the lower leaves up to a foot off the ground. You need the morning breeze to flow straight through the bottom of the plant to dry the morning dew. If the dew sits on the leaves, blight will take your plant. But if you are listening to this down in Texas, Arizona, Southern California, or Florida, where the summer sun feels like an open oven door, you must temper your cruelty. The rules change under a desert sun. If you strip the plant bare to a single stem down south, the relentless UV rays will actually cook the tomatoes right on the vine. It is a condition called sunscald. The skin turns white, blisters, and rots. Down south, you must leave a little more of a canopy. You might allow 2 or 3 main stems to grow. Instead of one, you must let a few upper leaves act as a natural umbrella to shade the developing fruit from the afternoon glare. Understand your sky. Look at your thermometer and adjust your hand accordingly. Rule number 3, the blossom end rot scam and the mystery of water. Let us talk about the heartbreak of the black, sunken bottom of the tomato. The disease is called blossom end rot. It is the single most common reason. New gardeners throw up their hands, curse the dirt, and give up on growing their own food. As I mentioned, my wife Miriam relies on this harvest. When a family of 8 looks to the root cellar for sustenance in February, a failed crop is a disaster. So we do not leave blossom end rot to chance. If you take a picture of a rotting tomato to the garden center, the young man in the green apron will look at it, nod seriously, and tell you that your soil lacks calcium. He will then walk you down aisle 4 and try to sell you a $15 bottle of liquid calcium spray. Or perhaps you go on a gardening forum online, and folks will tell you to crush up stomach antacid pills, or bury eggshells, or pour powdered milk into the dirt. The young man at the store is not lying to you out of malice. He is just repeating the training manual the fertilizer company gave him. But the fertilizer company is lying to you out of greed. And the folks on the internet are just repeating an old wives' tale they heard from someone else who failed. The agricultural extensions at the universities have known the truth for decades. Your backyard soil is almost never deficient in calcium. Unless you are growing in pure beach sand, there is plenty of calcium in the dirt right beneath your boots. Eggshells take months, sometimes years, to break down into a form the plant can actually use. The problem is not the soil. The problem is the plumbing. Calcium is a heavy, sluggish, immobile mineral inside a plant's vascular system. The only way it moves from the soil, up the long stem of the plant and into the furthest tip of the growing fruit, is by riding the steady, continuous, unbroken flow of water being drawn up by the roots. It needs the current to carry it. Think about how most folks in the suburbs water. Their garden, they go to work, and they let the soil bake in the sun all day until it is bone dry, crusty, and cracking. The plant gets desperately thirsty. To survive, the plant closes the pores on its leaves to stop losing moisture. The upward flow of water inside the stem slows to an absolute crawl. When that water stops moving, the heavy calcium drops out of the flow. It never reaches the bottom of the fruit. The cells at the bottom of the fruit, starved of the calcium they need to build strong cell walls, collapse and die. Then the homeowner comes home, sees the drooping plant, feels guilty, and goes out with a hose and floods the garden. The roots panic. They suck up this sudden flood of water too fast. The water rushes into the fruit. The fruit expands rapidly. And because the cells at the bottom are already dead and weak from the calcium starvation, the bottom of the fruit ruptures, turns black, and rots. Blossom end. Rot is not a calcium deficiency. It is a moisture fluctuation crisis. You did this to the plant by letting it ride a roller coaster of drought and flood. The cure for this does not come in a plastic bottle, and it does not cost $15. The cure is the oldest, quietest trick in farming. It is called mulch. When you plant your tomatoes, you must lay down a thick, heavy blanket of organic matter all around the base of the plant. We use clean straw. You can use old, spoiled hay, untreated grass clippings, or shredded autumn leaves. I am not talking about a decorative sprinkle to make it look nice. I am talking about a dense carpet, 4 to 6 inches deep, covering every inch of bare dirt In the bed, this blanket serves a vital purpose. It shields the soil from the baking radiation of the sun. It stops the dry wind from stealing the moisture. Underneath a good, thick layer of mulch, the soil remains dark, cool, and perfectly, evenly damp day and night. Because the soil never dries out, the roots are never thirsty. Because they are never thirsty, they are never drowned by sudden overwatering. The flow of water up the stem becomes a steady, gentle, unbroken river, carrying all the calcium the fruit will ever need, day after day. Crush all the eggshells you want to feel better. But if the water stops flowing, the tomato rots. Keep the moisture steady with mulch. That is the only real permanent fix. And while we are talking about water, hear this law, write it down, and never break it. You water the soil, not the plant. Do not stand over your tomatoes with a hose and spray the leaves because you think it looks refreshing or because it mimics the rain. Tomato leaves are incredibly fragile when it comes to fungi. When they get wet and that water sits on the leaf in the humid, stagnant afternoon air, it becomes a perfect warm breeding ground for fungal spores. Blight, rust, leaf spot, powdery mildew, almost every disease that destroys. A tomato plant starts with a wet leaf. Furthermore, if you leave the soil bare and blast it with a hose, the water splashes muddy dirt up onto the lower leaves. That dirt is full of dormant soil-borne pathogens. The splash is what infects the plant. Mulch stops. The splash. Drip irrigation, or carefully watering only the base of the plant with a watering can, keeps the leaves dry. Let the roots do the drinking. Keep the canopy dry. Rule number 4. The pests, the predators, and the danger of the quick fix. If you grow tomatoes long enough, and your soil is rich enough, you will eventually meet the enemies. The 2 worst offenders, the ones that will break your heart overnight, are the tomato hornworm and the common rat. Let us start with the hornworm. It is a monster of the insect world. It is a massive, thick, bright green caterpillar, sometimes the size of a man's thumb. A single hornworm can strip a mature tomato plant of every single leaf and take massive bites out of the green fruit in a single night. The most frustrating part is that they blend in perfectly with the green stems. They have white diagonal stripes that mimic the veins of the leaves. You can stare right at a plant in the broad daylight, knowing a worm is there, because half the plant is missing and your eyes will simply slide right past it. The modern English way to handle this is to buy a bottle of broad-spectrum chemical pesticide and drench the entire plant. But if you do that, you are burning your own house down. To kill a mouse, that pesticide kills the hornworm. Yes, but it also kills the honeybees that are pollinating your squash and cucumbers. It kills the ladybugs that are eating the aphids. It kills the parasitic wasps that naturally hunt the hornworms. You poison the very ecosystem that God put there to help you. You make yourself entirely dependent on the chemical bottle. We do not use poison. We use observation and ingenuity. Hornworms are masters of camouflage in the sun, but they have a fatal flaw. Their skin contains compounds that fluoresce. They glow under ultraviolet light. I do not hunt them during the day. I send my 2 youngest boys out into the garden at 10 o'clock at night with a cheap, battery-powered blacklight flashlight. To them it is a game, an adventure in the dark. They shine the purple beam over the rows. The tomato leaves look dark, dull purple in the beam. But the hornworms? The hornworms glow bright, neon green, shining like a beacon in the night. You cannot miss them. The boys pick them off by hand, drop them into a bucket, and toss them to the chickens the next morning. The chickens get a high-protein breakfast. The tomatoes are saved, and there are absolutely no chemicals introduced into the food my family eats. But the best fight is the one you never have to fight in the first place. My wife, Miriam, handles the prevention. She plants a thick, dense border of strong-smelling herbs, basil, borage, and marigolds, right at the base of every tomato row. The hornworm does not just appear. It hatches from an egg laid by a large hovering insect called the sphinx moth, or hummingbird moth. The moth hunts for tomato plants by smell. The strong, volatile oils of the basil and the marigolds act as an olfactory camouflage. They confuse the moth. She smells the heavy perfume of the flowers, and the sharp scent of the basil loses the scent of the tomato, and flies right past our garden, looking for an easier, unprotected target. You must build an ecosystem, not just a sterile crop row. Then there are the rats. They are smart, cautious, and infuriating. They will wait until a tomato is perfectly ripe, take one greedy, ruining bite out of the side of it, and leave the rest to rot on the vine. The hardware store will gladly sell you black plastic bait stations filled with poison blocks, and again, folks on the internet will tell you clever, unproven tricks about mixing baking soda and soda pop, claiming it will blow up the rat's stomach because they cannot burp. I will tell you flatly, the soda trick rarely works in the real world. The rat's stomach acids neutralize the baking soda long before anything dramatic happens. It is a myth. But let me speak very plainly about poison, because this is a moral issue as much as a practical one. A rat that eats poison from a bait station does not die instantly in the box. The poison takes days to break down. Its internal organs, the rat stumbles away, sick, slow, and confused, walking out into the open daylight. And while it is stumbling through the grass, an owl, a red-tailed hawk, or a stray farm cat sees an easy meal. They swoop down, catch the poisoned rat, and eat it. The poison transfers. It is called secondary poisoning. The owl dies in its roost. The hawk falls from the sky. The cat dies. Under the porch, you have just killed the very apex predators that nature built to control the rat population for you. You have permanently damaged the balance of your land for the sake of a quick fix. It is a foolish, destructive cycle that only benefits the company selling the poison. If you have a rat problem, get a barn cat. Let an animal do what God designed it to do. A good mouser will clear a garden in a week, just by leaving its scent around the perimeter. If you cannot keep a cat, use traditional wooden snap traps baited with peanut butter, or build a deep water bucket trap. They are clean, they are quick, they offer an instant end. They do not contaminate your soil, and they absolutely do not murder. The neighborhood owls. We must be responsible stewards of the land where our children play, not just blind consumers of it, the 17-cent secret of the old ones. Now I promised you a secret, a trick that costs almost nothing, that defies the expensive chemical sprays, and that fundamentally alters the internal biology of the tomato plant itself. This is the knowledge that the older generations knew in their bones, that the modern corporations made you forget, and that the university agricultural scientists have only recently proven in their sterile laboratories. When a tomato plant is attacked by a virus, a fungus, or a chewing insect, it panics. It is not a dumb, inanimate object. It realizes it is under siege, and it reacts. It creates a specific chemical hormone inside its tissues to trigger an immune response. It rushes defensive compounds to its leaves, fortifies its cell walls, and prepares for war. The scientists call this reaction systemic acquired resistance. The chemical hormone the plant produces to trigger this entire defense network is called salicylic acid. Long before anyone knew the words salicylic acid or systemic acquired resistance, my grandmother knew how to protect. Her garden, she knew that if she went down to the creek, stripped the fresh green bark off a willow tree, soaked it in a bucket of water for 3 days, and poured that murky tea on her crops, the crops would suddenly grow fiercely strong. She did not know the molecular science. She only knew the truth of the earth. Willow bark is naturally packed with high concentrations of salicylic acid. In the late 1800s, a German scientist isolated that exact same acid from the willow tree, synthesized it, and used it to create a pain-relieving medicine for human headaches. He called it aspirin. Yes, the plain, uncoated, generic aspirin tablet sitting in your medicine cabinet right now is chemically nearly identical to the warning hormone a tomato plant uses to trigger its immune system. Here is exactly what you do. You take one standard, uncoated aspirin tablet, about 325 milligrams. Do not use ibuprofen. Do not use Tylenol, it must be aspirin. You crush it up into a fine powder, between 2 spoons, and you dissolve it in 1 gallon of water. Now listen to me very carefully. If you choose to put this aspirin water in a pump sprayer and mist the leaves of the plant, you absolutely must do it at the first light of dawn, not at noon when the sun will magnify the water drops and burn the leaves, not in the evening when the water will sit on the leaves all night and invite mildew. At dawn you mist the leaves early, so the rising sun and the morning breeze dry them completely. Within 20 minutes, the leaves must not stay wet, alternatively, and this is what I recommend. If you live in a deeply humid climate where the morning dew hangs heavy until 10 o'clock, simply pour the gallon of aspirin water directly into the soil at the base of the plant. The roots will drink it up just the same, and the canopy remains perfectly dry. When that salicylic acid enters the plant's vascular system, the plant is tricked. It registers the hormone and thinks, I am under attack. The disease is here. But the disease is not there. You have just sounded a false alarm. The plant's immune system kicks into maximum overdrive without having to fight an actual enemy. It thickens its cell walls, making it harder for fungal spores to penetrate. It produces compounds that make its leaves taste bitter to chewing insects, and most miraculously of all, because the plant believes it is under mortal threat and might die, it throws all its remaining energy into reproducing before the end comes. It pushes more sugars into the fruit to make them more attractive to animals that might spread its seed. The result? A plant that naturally repels pests, fiercely resists blight, and produces tomatoes that are noticeably sweeter, more deeply red, and more robust than a plant left to itself. One generic aspirin pill costs about 17 cents. It replaces the $30 bottle of synthetic fungicide. It replaces the expensive, toxic pest deterrents. The companies that make billions of dollars selling you neon-colored fertilizers, chemical pesticides, and shiny metal cages do not want you to know about the trenching method. They do not want you to know that free grass clippings cure blossom end rot. They desperately want to keep you in the dark about the fact that a 17-cent headache pill can replace half the products on their shelves. They want you to be a consumer. They want you to believe that a successful garden is something you buy, piece by piece, every single spring ringing up your credit card at the register. I want to leave you with something, my bishop said to me. Last fall we were sitting on his porch after a barn, raising, drinking coffee, and a young Englisher who had stopped by to buy a quilt asked him why we live the way we live. He thought we were going to talk about religion or fear of the modern world. The bishop did not talk about religion. He looked out over the fields and said, "The English think we reject technology because we are afraid of it. That is not it. We reject technology when it makes us depend on people we do not know, on systems we cannot fix, on companies that do not care if our children live or die. We accept technology when it makes us more capable, more independent, and more able to take care of our own. The heavy twine is technology. The deep mulch is technology. The 17-cent aspirin trick is technology. They are just technologies that belong to us. We control them. They do not require a monthly subscription. They do not require an update. They will still work perfectly. When the power goes out, or the supply chains break, a man who knows how to coax 100 pounds of perfect sweet food out of a patch of dirt using nothing but a spool of twine, a pile of dry grass, and a quiet, patient understanding of nature is a man who needs to ask no one's permission and pay no one's bill. He is a free man. So this weekend, I want you to walk out to your garden. Step away from the screens and the noise. Get your hands dirty. Push away the dirt and feel the deep moisture in the soil. Look closely at the crotches of the stems and snap off those parasitic suckers with your own hands. Take back your power. Tell me in the comments below, how many suckers did you pull off your plant today? What state are you gardening in? And how hot is the sun beating down on your yard this week? If you have struggled with the black rot on the bottom of your fruit, tell me if you are finally going to put down a proper layer of deep mulch. I read every single one of these comments. The stories you send back from your own backyards, the successes and the failures from all across the country, are the reason I keep recording these words. Next time, I am going to step back from the plants and talk about the earth itself. I am going to show you how my grandfather built a compost pile that ran so fiercely hot in the dead of winter that it melted the snow in a 3-foot ring around it, using nothing but autumn leaves, kitchen scraps, and time. It is the beating heart, the engine, that drives everything else on this farm. Until then, plant deep, keep your leaves dry. Let the mulch and the aspirin do the heavy lifting, and remember, the people who built this country with their bare hands knew things that we are only just beginning to remember.